The cargo doors of the transport ship opened with a hiss, and dry, warm air rolled into the hold from the Coalition base outside. Ren walked down the ramp, boots crunching over loose gravel, and looked around at rows of hangars painted in faded gray and green. Soldiers from a dozen different worlds moved between the buildings, some walking on four legs, some floating on quiet repulsor discs, all of them heading somewhere in a hurry. A vendor near the fence sold spiced noodles from a cart with a broken wheel, and the smell mixed with engine oil and hot metal. Ren had heard stories about this base long before the ship landed. It sat close to the front line, in a stretch of space still fought over by the Coalition and the Skarn. Supply ships came and went almost every hour. And somewhere inside those hangars, according to rumor, was a human soldier that nobody could quite explain. "You will meet him at the briefing," said a voice beside Ren. It belonged to Miles, a young officer with tired eyes who had been sent to guide the new arrivals. Everyone talks about him like he is either a miracle or a mistake. Command has not decided which. Ren frowned. "What do you mean?" "You will see," Miles said, and did not explain further. The briefing room was a plain metal box with a long table and a wall screen showing a map of the region. Captain Halvorsen stood at the front, arms crossed, a scar across one eyebrow from some old battle nobody talked about. When the room filled with soldiers, she waited a moment, then tapped a control on the wall. A loud alarm rang through the room, sharp and sudden. Every soldier flinched. Some covered their ears. One young alien soldier dropped a data pad in surprise. One person did not react at all. He sat near the back, a lean man with short dark hair and calm brown eyes, watching the wall screen without any change in his face. While everyone else recovered from the noise, he simply waited, hands resting on the table, as if nothing had happened. "That," Halvorsen said, switching off the alarm, "is Daniel Reyes. He has been completely deaf since he was a child, and he is one of the best soldiers on this base." A murmur passed through the room. Ren stared at the man, trying to understand. A soldier who could not hear gunfire, could not hear a warning shout, could not hear an enemy sneaking up from behind. It sounded less like a soldier and more like someone waiting to be hurt. "Some of you are wondering how that is possible," Halvorsen continued. "You will find out soon enough. Reyes runs point on most patrols in this sector. Nobody assigned to his squad has been lost in the last 4 missions." After the briefing ended, Ren found an excuse to walk past Daniel's table. Up close, the man did not look special. No unusual armor, no strange device attached to his ear. Just a plain soldier checking the charge on his rifle with quiet, careful hands. Daniel looked up, noticed Ren watching, and gave a small nod, the kind soldiers give each other without needing words. Then he went back to his rifle. Later that day, Ren was called into a smaller office where Halvorsen waited alone. "You are being assigned to Reyes's squad," she said. "Officially, your job is to relay audio warnings to him during combat, since he cannot hear alarms, gunfire, or shouted orders." "Unofficially?" Ren asked. Halvorsen almost smiled. "Unofficially, watch him, learn from him, and do not get in his way." Ren did not understand what that meant yet, but agreed anyway. There was something about the calm way Daniel had sat through that alarm, unshaken while everyone else flinched, that stayed in Ren's mind. That evening, Ren found Daniel in the training yard, alone, running through combat drills against a row of practice targets. No one called out commands. No timer beeped. Daniel simply moved from target to target, reacting to small motion sensors that lit up on the ground before each dummy sprang forward, striking each one with brutal, efficient speed. Ren stood at the edge of the yard and watched. There was no wasted movement, no hesitation. It was like watching someone play a private game only he understood the rules to. When the drill ended, Daniel noticed Ren standing there and walked over, breathing steady despite the exercise. He tapped his own chest, then pointed at Ren, then raised both eyebrows in a silent question. "You new here?" Ren nodded. Daniel studied him for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad and pen. An old habit from before the base had proper translation tools installed. He wrote 3 words and held it up. "I don't need saving." Ren read the words twice, then looked up at Daniel's steady, unreadable face. "We will see," Ren said quietly, though Daniel could not hear it. Walking back to the barracks that night, Ren could not stop thinking about the assignment. Command wanted a shield placed between Daniel and danger, someone to fill the gap his ears could not. But watching him move through that drill, silent and precise, Ren began to wonder if the danger was not Daniel's deafness at all. Maybe the real question was not whether Daniel needed protecting. Maybe it was whether anyone protecting him could actually keep up. The transport shook hard as it dropped through the atmosphere, cargo nets snapping against crates stacked along the walls. Ren gripped a handle bolted to the ceiling and tried not to think about how many hours of flight training the pilot actually had. Around the hold, 10 soldiers sat strapped into narrow seats, weapons braced across their laps, faces lit by the dim red glow of the warning lights. Daniel sat near the ramp, eyes closed, one hand resting flat against the metal wall of the ship. Ren had learned, over the past 2 weeks of training together, that this was not resting. Daniel was feeling the vibration of the engines through his palm, reading the ship the way another soldier might listen to it. 2 minutes, Miles called out from the cockpit doorway, voice raised over the noise. Ren reached over and tapped Daniel twice on the shoulder, a signal they had practiced together. Daniel opened his eyes and gave a short nod, then reached for his rifle. The mission briefing had been simple enough. A coalition mining outpost near the edge of contested territory had gone quiet 3 hours ago. No distress call, no explanation, just silence on every channel. Now the squad was being sent in to find out why. The ramp dropped, and the noise hit like a wall. Alarms blared across the outpost, red lights spinning against smoke-filled air. Gunfire cracked somewhere to the left, and a distant explosion shook loose dust from the ceiling of the landing platform. Soldiers scattered from the ship immediately, moving toward cover behind stacked cargo containers. Ren's ears rang from the noise, and for one dizzying second, everything blurred together into pure sound and panic. Someone shouted an order. Another explosion rocked the platform. Ren turned to find Daniel and felt a spike of fear. Daniel was already moving. While the rest of the squad scrambled for cover, Daniel walked forward at a steady pace, low and controlled, rifle raised, scanning the smoke with sharp, careful eyes. He did not flinch at the explosions. He did not duck at the gunfire cracking nearby. He simply moved like a man reading a familiar room, adjusting his path around obstacles Ren could not even see yet. Ren ran to catch up, remembering the assignment. Watch him. Protect him. A dark shape moved at the edge of a container to Daniel's right, a Skarn soldier raising a weapon, aiming directly at Daniel's exposed side. Without thinking, Ren threw himself forward, slamming into Daniel and knocking them both behind a stack of crates just as a shot cracked through the space where Daniel had been standing a second earlier. For a moment, they lay there together in the dust, breathing hard. Daniel turned, looked at Ren, and mouthed something Ren could not quite catch over the ringing in his own ears. It looked like thank you. Then Daniel's eyes shifted, focused on something behind Ren's shoulder, and his face went sharp and alert. Before Ren could turn around, Daniel shoved him hard to the side. An explosive charge, thrown from somewhere in the smoke, landed exactly where Ren had been kneeling and detonated a heartbeat later, throwing dust and metal fragments into the air. Ren's ears, still recovering from the ringing, had never even registered the soft click of the charge landing. Daniel had felt it, the vibration through the ground beneath his boots, and reacted before the sound even mattered. They stared at each other for a moment, both breathing hard, both alive because of the other. Daniel reached out and tapped Ren twice on the shoulder, the same signal Ren had used earlier, and gave a short nod. Even, thank you, and something else Ren was only beginning to understand. There was no time to think further. More Skarn soldiers pushed forward through the smoke, and the squad regrouped behind the containers, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. Ren stayed close to Daniel now, not because Daniel needed guiding, but because fighting beside him felt different from fighting beside anyone else. Daniel moved with a strange, silent rhythm, reading footsteps through the ground, reading faces and body language faster than most soldiers could process a shouted warning. When Ren spotted movement to their left, a runner circling to flank their position, there was no time to shout a warning Daniel could not hear. Instead, Ren grabbed Daniel's wrist and pointed, sharp and clear. Daniel followed the gesture instantly, turned, and dropped the runner with 2 precise shots before the man could raise his weapon. Slowly, the outpost fell quiet again. The remaining Skarn soldiers retreated into the tunnels beneath the mining complex, and the squad secured the landing platform, checking for wounded and clearing the smoke with portable fans. Later, sitting against a crate while medics moved through the wreckage, Ren finally caught their breath. Daniel sat nearby, cleaning dust from his rifle with the same careful, patient hands from the training yard days earlier. Ren thought about the two moments in the fight. The shot that would have hit Daniel, if Ren had not moved first. The explosive charge that would have hit Ren, if Daniel had not felt it coming. Neither of them had needed saving alone. They had needed each other. Daniel glanced over, caught Ren staring, and offered a small, tired smile before going back to his rifle. Nothing needed to be said, and even if it had, Daniel would not have heard it anyway. For the first time since arriving at the base, Ren stopped thinking of the assignment as a duty. It felt, instead, like the beginning of something worth protecting on both sides. The mess hall smelled like burnt sauce and recycled air, and at a corner table, Ren sat hunched over a small handbook, trying to bend two fingers into a shape that felt completely wrong. Across the table, Daniel calmly repeated the sign for water, patient as ever, while Ren's hand cramped for the third time in 10 minutes. "You are doing it upside down," Sana said, walking past with a tray of food. She was the squad's medic, a sharp-eyed woman who had picked up basic sign language years earlier, back when she worked at a hospital for wounded soldiers. She set her tray down and demonstrated the sign properly, slow and clear. "Like this. Your hand is a cup, not a claw." Ren tried again. Daniel watched, then nodded, a small approving tilt of his head. 2 weeks had passed since the mining outpost, and Ren had asked Sana for lessons almost immediately after that mission. Shouted orders meant nothing to Daniel in a firefight, and pointing could only communicate so much. If Ren was going to keep fighting beside him, real communication mattered more than instinct alone. "He was not always this good at reading a battlefield," Sana said, nodding toward Daniel, who was busy showing another sign for careful. When he first joined the coalition forces, half the officers wanted him reassigned to a supply post. Some even wanted him discharged completely. Ren looked up, surprised. Why did they change their minds? Sana glanced at Daniel, as if silently asking permission to tell the story. Daniel, catching the look, shrugged and gestured for her to go ahead, clearly having heard some version of this conversation before. "He grew up in a mining town on a small colony world," Sana explained. "Lost his hearing completely after an accident when he was young, some kind of explosion in the tunnels. Doctors said he would never serve in the military. Too dangerous, they said. A soldier who cannot hear an alarm is a soldier who gets his squad killed. But he joined anyway," Ren said. "He trained twice as hard as anyone else to prove them wrong. Learned to read lips, learned to feel vibrations through the ground, learned to watch body language the way most people listen to tone of voice. When his first commanding officer saw him complete a live fire course faster and cleaner than any hearing soldier in the unit, that officer fought to keep him in service. That officer was Halvorsen." Ren looked over at Daniel with new understanding. The calm, unreadable soldier from the training yard suddenly made a lot more sense. Every quiet nod, every careful movement, every moment of stillness during chaos was not luck or coincidence. It was years of discipline built specifically to overcome something everyone else assumed made him weaker. Daniel, noticing the pause in conversation, tapped the table twice to get their attention, then signed something quickly. Sana laughed. "He says stop talking about him like he cannot see you," she translated. Ren felt heat rise and quickly signed an apology, clumsy but understandable. Daniel accepted it with a short laugh, silent but visible in the way his shoulders shook. Later that evening, the squad gathered in the briefing room for an update on enemy activity in the region. Halvorsen stood at the front, the wall screen behind her showing intercepted data from a recent Skarn transmission. "Intelligence picked up something troubling," she said. "The Skarn have been testing a new weapon system, something built around sound. Early reports call it a sonic disruptor. It does not kill directly. It disorients, causes pain, and can incapacitate an entire squad through hearing alone." The room went quiet. Several soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. "If this weapon works the way intelligence suggests," Halvorsen continued, "any unit hit by it will be unable to hear orders, unable to coordinate, and vulnerable to a direct assault while disoriented. Ren's eyes moved instinctively toward Daniel, sitting calm and still near the back of the room, watching the screen with careful attention despite not needing the audio at all. For the first time, the thought crossed Ren's mind clearly. Whatever this weapon was built to do, it could not touch Daniel at all. After the briefing ended, Ren found Daniel outside, checking his gear under the dim floodlights of the training yard. Ren approached and signed a simple, careful question, still slow with the unfamiliar movements. "Are you worried?" Daniel considered the question for a moment, then shook his head and signed back, steady and sure. "I have been fighting without sound my whole life. This is nothing new." Ren studied his calm expression, and for the first time understood why Halvorsen had once called him one of the best soldiers on the base. Every other soldier feared a weapon built to strip away their hearing. Daniel had never had it to lose in the first place. Whatever the Skarn believed this new weapon could do, they were about to learn something the Coalition forces had somehow overlooked as well. Somewhere on this base was a soldier already immune to their greatest advantage. And soon, they would all find out exactly what that meant. 3 days after the briefing, an alert tore through the base before dawn, pulling every soldier out of their bunks and into full gear within minutes. A Coalition supply convoy near the southern ridge had been ambushed, and reports were already coming in that whatever hit them was not a normal attack. Ren met Daniel at the armory, both of them pulling on their gear in silence, the tension in the room thick enough to feel. Around them, other soldiers moved quickly, checking weapons twice, some visibly nervous in a way Ren had not seen before a mission. Halvorsen appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the field. The convoy escort reported hearing a strange tone right before their communications went dark, she said. "Whatever hit them, it matches the profile of the sonic disruptor we were warned about. We are moving out to reinforce the ridge and pull back any survivors." The flight to the ridge felt longer than usual, every soldier quiet, checking gear that did not need checking. Daniel sat near the ramp as always, one hand pressed against the wall, reading the ship through vibration alone. Ren watched him and felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear for what was coming. Relief that at least one person on this ship could not be touched by the weapon everyone else feared. The ramp dropped onto a scene of chaos. Smoke rose from overturned supply vehicles scattered across the ridge, and Coalition soldiers lay scattered near their positions, some moving weakly, others completely still. As Ren's boots hit the ground, a strange, high tone rippled through the air, not loud exactly, but wrong somehow, pressing against the skull in an unnatural way. Around Ren, soldiers staggered. One dropped to their knees, hands pressed over their ears. Another stumbled sideways, disoriented, weapons slipping from numb fingers. The tone rose sharper, and Ren's own vision blurred at the edges, a wave of nausea rolling through their stomach as the world tilted unpleasantly. Through the haze, Ren saw movement. Skarn's soldiers advancing from the tree-line, weapons raised, moving toward the disoriented Coalition line with brutal efficiency, clearly counting on the sonic weapon to clear their path. Ren tried to raise a weapon and aim, but the world spun too much to trust the shot. Nearby, Miles collapsed completely, weapon clattering uselessly against the rocks. The tone pulsed again, and Ren's knees buckled, vision narrowing to a small tunnel of gray static. Just before losing consciousness, Ren saw him. Daniel stood in the middle of the chaos, completely unaffected, rifle raised and steady, moving between fallen soldiers with the same calm precision from every training drill. The sonic weapon that had dropped an entire squad to their knees meant absolutely nothing to a man who could not hear it in the first place. The last thing Ren remembered clearly was Daniel dragging someone by the collar toward a shattered supply crate, using it as cover before the static in Ren's vision finally swallowed everything whole. Time became difficult to measure after that. Ren drifted in and out of awareness, catching fragments through the fog. The sound of gunfire, distant and irregular. The vibration of something heavy being dragged across rocky ground. A shape kneeling briefly beside Ren, checking a pulse, before moving on toward someone else in worse condition. At some point, clarity returned enough for Ren to understand what was happening. Daniel was alone out there, the only soldier still standing, holding a defensive position against an advancing enemy force, while an entire squad lay disoriented and helpless around him. Through blurred vision, Ren watched Daniel move from position to position, dragging wounded soldiers behind cover one at a time, exposing himself again and again to enemy fire in the process. Each trip cost him something: a graze along one arm, a shard of shrapnel catching his side during one dash across open ground. Still he kept moving, calm and controlled, refusing to slow down even as blood soaked through his uniform. The sonic tone pulsed again, and Ren felt consciousness slipping once more, vision darkening at the edges. In that last moment before losing awareness completely, Ren saw Daniel take a hit, stumbling hard before catching himself against a broken supply crate, one hand pressed against a wound at his side. He did not fall. He straightened, raised his rifle again, and turned back toward the tree line, standing alone between the enemy and every wounded soldier lying helpless behind him. The image burned itself into Ren's fading mind. A single soldier, wounded and outnumbered, immune to the weapon meant to break an entire squad, refusing to give even 1 inch of ground. Then everything went dark. Consciousness returned slowly, like wading up through deep water. The first thing Ren noticed was the smell of smoke and scorched metal. The second was the ringing silence pressing against both ears, a strange emptiness where the world used to be. For one disorienting moment, Ren understood, with a small shock, exactly what silence like this must feel like to Daniel every single day of his life. Ren's eyes opened to a gray, dust-filled sky. Nearby, the sound of gunfire came muffled and distant, as if wrapped in layers of cloth. Rolling onto one side sent a sharp ache through Ren's skull, but the movement also brought the battlefield back into view. Daniel was still fighting. Blood darkened one side of his uniform, and he moved with a slight limp now, favoring his left leg, but his rifle remained steady in his hands as he ducked behind a broken supply crate, firing controlled bursts toward the tree line. 2 wounded soldiers lay behind him, dragged to partial safety, and a third figure stirred weakly nearby, beginning to wake the same way Ren had moments earlier. The ringing in Ren's ears began to fade, replaced slowly by the sharper sounds of the real battlefield. Shouting, explosions. The Skarn commander's voice, amplified through some kind of speaker system, barking furious orders at his soldiers. Ren forced their body upright, ignoring the pounding headache, and crawled toward the nearest weapon, one abandoned in the dirt. Fingers wrapped around the grip, and slowly, painfully, Ren pushed up into a low crouch. Ahead, Daniel had noticed the movement of a Skarn soldier trying to flank around the crate. Without hesitation, Daniel turned, fired twice, and dropped the attacker before pivoting back toward the tree line where the main group of enemy soldiers regrouped, clearly frustrated. Ren understood then why the Skarn commanders sounded so angry. Their greatest weapon, the sonic disruptor that had dropped an entire squad in seconds, had done absolutely nothing to the one soldier still standing between them and an easy victory. Whatever plan they had built around that weapon had failed the moment it met someone who could not hear it in the first place. Ren moved low and fast, closing the distance to Daniel's position. Daniel noticed the approach immediately, tension flashing across his face until recognition replaced it. He offered a short nod, then gestured sharply toward the tree line, a clear signal, more coming. Together, they took position behind the crate, back to back, watching opposite directions as the Skarn pushed forward in a final, desperate assault. Ren's vision still swam slightly at the edges, but training took over, muscle memory guiding aim and trigger even through the lingering disorientation. The fighting that followed blurred into short, brutal exchanges. A soldier breaking from cover, cut down before reaching the crate. Another circling wide, caught by Ren's aim just as Daniel spun to intercept a second attacker from the opposite side. Neither of them spoke, because Daniel could not hear speech anyway, but somehow every movement synced perfectly, each covering exactly where the other could not. Through the chaos, Ren spotted it, a device mounted on a low tripod near the tree line, humming faintly, clearly the source of the sonic weapon that had devastated their squad earlier. A single Skarn technician crouched beside it, making adjustments, preparing to activate it again. Ren grabbed Daniel's arm and pointed sharply toward the device. Daniel's eyes followed the gesture, understanding immediately. There was no time for a careful plan. Daniel broke from cover first, sprinting low across open ground while Ren provided covering fire, forcing the remaining Skarn soldiers to duck rather than aim clearly. The technician near the device noticed Daniel's approach too late, reaching for a sidearm just as Daniel closed the final distance and drove the butt of his rifle hard into the man's chest, knocking him back from the controls. With brutal efficiency, Daniel turned the rifle and fired directly into the device's exposed circuitry. Sparks erupted. The humming tone spiked painfully loud for one final second, then died completely, leaving only the sound of scattered gunfire and shouting in its place. The sudden silence from the weapon seemed to break something in the remaining Skarn soldiers. Without their advantage, facing a defensive position they could not break, the attack lost its momentum. Whistles sounded somewhere in the treeline, an apparent signal, and the surviving enemy soldiers began pulling back into the trees, abandoning the assault entirely. For a long moment, the ridge fell quiet, broken only by distant retreating footsteps and the groans of wounded soldiers beginning to stir across the battlefield. Daniel lowered his rifle slowly, breathing hard, one hand pressed against the wound at his side. Ren hurried over, finally able to see the damage clearly now that the fighting had stopped. Blood soaked through a large portion of his uniform, far more than Ren had realized during the chaos. "You need help," Ren said uselessly, forgetting for a moment that Daniel could not hear the words at all. Daniel managed a tired, crooked smile anyway, reading the concern clearly enough on Ren's face without needing sound. He reached out and tapped Ren's shoulder twice, the familiar signal between them, before his knees finally buckled. Ren caught him before he hit the ground, lowering him carefully against the broken crate, shouting now for the medics who were already rushing across the ridge toward their position. For the first time since this partnership began, it was Ren holding Daniel steady instead of the other way around. And somehow, that felt like exactly how it was always supposed to work. 3 days after the battle at the ridge, the medical bay had mostly emptied out, though the smell of antiseptic still hung heavy in the air. Sunlight came through a narrow window near the ceiling, cutting a thin bright line across the floor tiles, and somewhere down the hall, a maintenance drone hummed quietly while cleaning a scorch mark left over from repairs. Daniel sat propped up in a medical bed, bandages wrapped around his side, looking mildly annoyed at being kept there another day. Sana stood beside him, checking a monitor, ignoring the unimpressed expression on his face completely. "You lost a lot of blood," she said, then signed the same thing slowly for good measure. "One more day of rest. Then you can complain to someone else about it." Daniel rolled his eyes, but did not argue further. Ren arrived a few minutes later, carrying 2 trays of food from the mess hall, having learned quickly that hospital food alone was not enough to keep either of them satisfied. Daniel brightened slightly at the sight of actual food and gestured for Ren to sit. For a while, they ate in comfortable silence, something Ren had grown used to over the past weeks. Words were not always necessary between them anymore. A glance, a nod, a small gesture carried enough meaning on its own. Eventually, Halvorsen appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, though her expression carried none of the usual sharpness from briefings. She studied Daniel for a long moment before speaking. "Command reviewed the reports from the ridge," she said. "Word is spreading fast across the wider coalition. A soldier immune to the enemy's most dangerous new weapon, holding a position alone against overwhelming numbers, saving nearly a dozen lives in the process." Daniel shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, and signed something short. Sana, standing nearby, translated with a small smile. "He says he was just doing his job." Halvorsen almost laughed. "That is exactly the kind of thing that makes people uncomfortable around you, Reyes. Doing your job better than anyone else on this base." She turned to Ren next. Her expression grew slightly more serious. "Your report mentioned specific coordination signals used mid-battle, gestures developed outside standard protocol. Command wants to know more about that." Ren hesitated, unsure how official any of this actually was. "We built a simple sign system together, enough to communicate without needing sound during combat. It helped more than I expected." Halvorsen nodded slowly, something calculating behind her eyes. "Enough that other units might benefit from learning it too, especially if the Skarn keep pushing sonic weapons forward. A squad immune to disorientation tactics could be valuable in more places than just here." She left without further explanation, but the implication was clear enough. What started as an assignment to watch over one soldier considered a liability might soon become a wider example for the entire coalition force. After she left, Daniel gave Ren a curious look, silently asking what that conversation had really been about. Ren explained slowly through gestures and simple words, watching understanding spread across Daniel's face. Daniel considered this for a moment, then signed something thoughtful, slower than usual, giving Ren time to follow along. It roughly translated to, maybe being different was never really the problem. Maybe everyone else just needed to catch up eventually. Ren thought back to that first day at the base, the alarm ringing through the briefing room while every soldier flinched except one. Back then, it had looked like a weakness on full display, a soldier unable to react to an obvious warning. Now, weeks later, having fought beside him through smoke and gunfire, and a weapon built specifically to exploit hearing, Ren understood the truth was almost the exact opposite. Daniel's silence was not the absence of awareness. It was a different kind of awareness entirely, sharpened over years into something most soldiers never developed at all, hearing or not. That evening, once Sanaa finally allowed Daniel to walk around the medical bay without complaint, the two of them stood near the same narrow window, watching the sun set over the base outside. Repair crews moved across distant hangars, patching damage from recent skirmishes, while transport ships rose and landed on schedule despite everything the war kept throwing at them. Daniel tapped Ren's shoulder gently, the familiar signal between them, then signed a simple question. "Still glad you got assigned here?" Ren thought about the answer honestly before responding, signing back slowly but clearly. "I came here thinking I would be the one protecting you." Daniel raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Turns out you have been protecting all of us the whole time. I just got to stand close enough to see it happen." Daniel's mouth curved into a quiet, genuine smile, and for a long moment, neither of them needed to say anything else. Outside, the war continued somewhere beyond the horizon, distant and unfinished, but for now, standing together at that window, it felt far enough away not to matter. The silence between them was not something to overcome anymore. It had become, somewhere along the way, the quietest kind of trust either of them had ever known.